What's going on? It's Suk and I'm back with a brand new video on SuperDuprTech. Now in today's video I shall be showing you the results that I got when benchmarking the brand new entry model MacBook Air. Of course, as this MacBook Air comes equipped with Apple's very first system on a chip, I shall be running a number of different benchmarks native through macOS, and I'll also be running a few that will be translated using Rosetta. As always, I shall be uploading a number of videos very soon showcasing the performance of the other M1 equipped Macs which Apple has just released, alongside with comparing them to their predecessors which use the Intel processors. If you don't want to miss out on those videos, then be sure to subscribe, clicking the bell icon to be notified of when those videos go live. But without any further ado, let's hit the titles. So the first test that I ran on this MacBook Air was actually an emulated test, if you like, using Rosetta 2. Now I did run GeekBench 4. Now GeekBench 4 gives a score for both single and multi-threaded tasks, and after these have then been performed, it will then give a score based on its performance and the time taken to perform them. Now with this, I got a single core score of 5,735, whereas I got a multi-core score of 22,955. Now once again, using GeekBench 4, I ran their compute test to see how well the OpenGR engine ran through GeekBench, and as you can see with this test, I got a score of 66,708. The next test that I ran was once again from GeekBench 4's compute lineup of tests, this time testing out how well the Metal engine ran on this Mac. Now with this, I got a score of 60,057. The next test that I ran was once again using Rosetta 2 in order to translate from Intel to Apple Silicon machines. Now this test that I ran was once again from GeekBench, this time their newest set of tests found in GeekBench 5. Now when running the CPU test, I got a single core score of 1,311 and a multi-core score of 5,896. Like I had previously done, I ran the compute test to see how well the OpenGR engine ran on this MacBook Air while also being emulated through Rosetta 2. Now with this, I got a score of 14,111. And once again running the compute test, but this time testing how well the Metal engine ran on this MacBook Air, we got a score of 17,989. So lo and behold, the next set of tests that I ran on this MacBook Air were once again from GeekBench 5, but this time they were not being run through the translation layer known as Rosetta 2, they were being run natively on macOS. Now the first set of tests are technically designed to run on an Intel x86 CPU. Which is quite interesting, especially considering that we ran the previous test as an emulation through Rosetta 2 and actually got higher scores. So these first set of tests were actually lower than what we saw with Rosetta 2, with a single core score of 1,286 and a multi-core score of 5,751. Now personally speaking, this is quite interesting, especially as it shows how good the Rosetta 2 translation software actually is, especially when you're running something that's designed for an Intel CPU but natively through macOS. It's actually doing worse than the emulation software. So it's quite interesting, and once again I applaud Apple for how well they've done a job with this. They've done a tremendous job with it. And if you're interested in seeing what the scores were like, especially when running natively on the Apple M1 system on a chip, well, with this we got a single core score so much higher. We got 1720 and a multi-core score of 7554, which is quite unheard of, especially in a machine that doesn't have a fan. The next lineup of tests are of course the compute lineup, which are designed to run on the integrated GPU on this system on a chip known as the M1. Now, when running the OpenGL lineup of tests, I got a score of 16,666. And when running the Metal lineup of compute tests, I got a score of 18,712. So this was very interesting, but actually quite expected, as the result that we got when running through the Rosetta 2 translation layer was closer to around 18,000. Whereas when running natively through macOS, we got a score of around 18,700. Now this difference is quite interesting, especially when you factor in that Apple make Rosetta and they also own the Metal graphics engine. So yeah, the difference wasn't going to be as big as that, but when you look at the differences between the OpenGL side of things running through macOS directly and through the Rosetta translation layer, there is a massive difference. So yeah, this translation layer being Rosetta is doing an incredible job. The next test that I ran on this MacBook Air was GFXBench Metal. Now GFXBench runs a number of different tests which vary from both higher and lower levels of intensity. Now in the interest of saving time, I've calculated the average for these results, but of course as always I will show you each individual result. Now the average that I got for the higher level intensive task was around 162.82 frames per second, whereas for the lower I got an average of 155.9 frames per second. If you did manage to watch the Apple event in which they showcased the M1 processor alongside launching these MacBook Air models, you'll recall that Apple did touch briefly on the fact that these machines would have slightly faster SSDs. Now of course this would then translate to much faster transfer speeds. Now once again, running Rosetta 2, I ran the Blackmagic disk speed test and got a read speed of 2,738.4 megabytes per second and a write speed of 2,069.2 megabytes per second, which is actually pretty good. Next up we have NovaBench. Now NovaBench is a good general benchmarking test as it's designed to test not only the performance of the CPU and GPU but also the storage and the system memory. Now with this test I was running it once again through the Rosetta 2 translation layer, and with this I got a score of 2,146. And just to tell you how big of a difference this is, the 13-inch MacBook Pro from 2020, so about six-ish months ago, with the 10th generation processor from Intel, scored 1,465. This is around a 37% increase in performance, which is unheard of, especially when you factor in that this machine is still cheaper than that MacBook Pro and it's not got a fan. It's incredible. I do once again want to point this out, that this is once again being run through Rosetta 2. It's not even running directly natively for macOS. The difference when it does is more than likely going to increase to around 50%. These are incredible numbers. Just let it sink in. I then chose to perform a basic network speed test and got a download speed of 204 megabits per second and an upload speed of 20.1 megabits per second. Now this was once again ran using Rosetta 2, but there shouldn't be much of a difference here as it's only interfacing with the network. Nothing really much is happening with regards to the processor. Next, I ran CineBench R23, which was being ran directly through macOS, not needing the support of Rosetta 2. Now, CineBench is a good benchmarking program as it not only tests each individual thread and then gives a score similarly to how GeekBench gives its scores based on time taken to complete a task. Now, on the multi-core side of things, I got a score of 6,868. And on the single core side of things, I got a score of 1,489. Now this also gave me a ratio of 4.61. Next, I did a timed export with Final Cut Pro, exporting a 5-minute 24-second video file to H.264 at both Full HD 1920 by 1080 and UHD 4K 3840 by 2160. It is also worth noting that with this test, I did indeed turn off background rendering. Now the HD export came in faster as you'd expect with a time of 51 seconds, whereas the 4K project took a little longer to export at 4 minutes and 40 seconds. The last series of tests that I performed came from Unigen. The first of these was their Heaven benchmarking test, which is a heavy CPU and GPU test which will give us a general score on its performance and then an average frame rate for when rendering out a particular scene. Now for the Heaven test, I got a score of 2021 and an average frame rate of 80.2 frames per second. Once again, using Unigen benchmarking tools, the last test that I performed was their Valley test. Now with this, I got a higher score of 2,955 and an average frame rate of 70.6 frames per second. It is also worth noting that with this lineup of tests, they were run using the Rosetta 2 translation layer. So expect higher results, of course, running directly through macOS. Now this is actually quite interesting because the results that I got for those two tests were actually higher than the entry 5K iMac, which was released once again only a few months back. So that'll be it for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to hit the thumbs up button, and if you are new around here, then be sure to subscribe clicking the bell icon to be notified of when any of my new videos go live. Also, if you have got any questions with anything you've seen in this video, then be sure to leave them down below in the comment section, or alternatively you can hit me up on my social media, links to which can of course be found down below in the video description. And while you're down there, you'll also find links to purchase this MacBook Air for the cheapest prices available, so go ahead and check those out. But once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.